Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The air in the bridge of the Coast Guard cutter Resolute was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the hum of electronics, a comfortingly familiar scent in the vast, indifferent expanse of the North Atlantic. My name is Petty Officer Marcus Thorne, and I've seen my share of maritime oddities in my 12 years with the Coast Guard. From rogue waves that could swallow a freighter whole to ghost fishing vessels drifting derelict, the sea always had a way of surprising you. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the call that came in on a Tuesday in late October. We were 3 days into a routine patrol, roughly 400 nautical miles east of the Bermuda Triangle's infamous northern vertex. The weather was typical for the season. A churning gray sea under an equally gray sky, a perpetual mist clinging to the waves, and a wind that bit straight through the layers of our standard issue gear. I was on the comms watch, monitoring a dozen frequencies when the static-laced signal crackled through. It wasn't just static, it was a wall of it, ancient and brittle like crumbling plaster, but beneath the hiss, a voice emerged. It was distant, tinny, as if speaking from a great depth, yet undeniably clear. SS Orion heavy listing, requesting immediate assistance, coordinates approximate, lost power, lifeboats compromised, please respond. My hand instinctively hovered over the squelch button, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. The voice was male, educated, with an accent I couldn't quite place, transatlantic, perhaps from an older era. But it wasn't the voice that was chilling, it was the name. The SS Orion, I knew that name. Every sea dog worth his salt knew that name. It was a luxury passenger liner, a queen of the seas that had vanished without a trace in 1934, swallowed by the Bermuda Triangle. No wreck, no debris, no bodies, just gone. Say again, I transmitted, my voice tight. This is Coast Guard cutter Resolute. Identify vessel and repeat distress. More static than the voice, fainter now, tinged with what sounded like a desperate exhaustion. SS. Orion, latitude 35.7 north, longitude 62.1 west. We are sinking. Please help us. The coordinates were exactly where we were. My blood ran cold. I immediately alerted Captain Davies. He was a stoic man, a veteran of countless storms and rescues, but even his brow furrowed with a mixture of disbelief and grim curiosity when I relayed the message. The Orion, he muttered, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. Thorne, are you sure? That ship went down nearly 90 years ago. Sir, the call was clear. The coordinates match our current position. It sounds authentic, sir. Like an old recording, maybe, but why now? Why on our frequency? Davies considered it, then made a decision. Ghost signal or not, it's a distress call. Even if it's 100 years old, we investigate, full speed ahead. Nav, plot a search pattern. Thorne, tried to raise them again. I tried. I hailed them on every frequency, broadcast the call, but there was only silence. The static had vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. The only sound was the thrum of our engines as the Resolute cut through the choppy waves. The search pattern stretched for hours. The mist thickened, reducing visibility to a mere 100 yards. The radar was clean, sonar silent. Hope, or rather the professional obligation, began to wane. Most of the crew believed it was an atmospheric anomaly, some freak reception of an ancient recording bouncing off the ionosphere. But a small, nagging part of me, and I suspected Captain Davies too, felt something far more primal. Then, just as the sun began its descent into the murky horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, a faint echo appeared on the radar. Too small for a large vessel, too large for a standard debris field, it was stationary. Contact, yelled the radar operator, his voice cutting through the strained silence of the bridge. Bearing 270, range 3 miles, looks like a vessel, sir, small, perhaps a derelict. Captain Davies squinted into the gathering gloom. All hands to deck, prepare launch for a boarding party. Thorne, you're with me. Jensen, prep the medical bay, expect anything. The anything hung heavy in the air. We approached cautiously, the Resolute's powerful searchlights cutting through the mist, and then we saw it. It wasn't a lifeboat, it wasn't debris, it was a ship. Not the full SS Orion, no, but a substantial section of it. A large, intact piece of what looked like the stern, maybe 50 feet long, listing precariously. It was a colossal, impossible ruin. Barnacles encrusted its waterline, but above, the paint was miraculously preserved, faded to a pastel blue with streaks of rust, bearing the faint, elegant script, Orion. It was a ghost, a fragment of the past, impossibly afloat, like a forgotten toy adrift in a bathtub. The mist, heavy and cold, clung to it like a shroud, making it seem to waver at the edges of our vision. There were no lights, no signs of life, just the slow, rhythmic creak of tortured metal and wood as it rolled with the waves. It looked like a photograph from a bygone era, perfectly still, perfectly wrong. My God, someone whispered on deck. We launched the rigid hull inflatable boat. Captain Davies, myself, Medic Reyes, and 2 other crewmen, Petty Officer Miller and Petty Officer Chang made up the boarding party. The sea was deceptively calm around the derelict, a strange pocket of quiet in the otherwise churning ocean. As we drew closer, the details became terrifyingly clear. The Orion fragment wasn't just afloat, it looked preserved. The wooden railings, though weathered, were largely intact. Portholes, some shattered, others still in place, stared out like vacant eyes. And the smell, oh, the smell. It was a pungent cocktail of salt, decay, and something else, something cloyingly sweet and metallic, like old blood and stagnant flowers. As we neared, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A figure, leaning against a collapsed bulkhead obscured by shadow and mist. My heart hammered against my ribs. Survivors, Ray's breathed, his voice thick with disbelief. After all this time, we got the inflatable alongside a relatively stable section of the hull. The air was frigid now, carrying the metallic tang of old rust. Davies led the way, scrambling up a rope ladder we threw over, his every movement precise. I followed, then Ray's, Miller, and Chang. The deck was littered with debris, corroded pipes, and what looked like furniture reduced to splinters. Everything was coated in a fine layer of salt and a viscous black grime. The first survivor was an elderly woman, her hair a wispy white halo around a face like ancient parchment. She was dressed in a tattered, heavy wool dress, typical of the 1930s. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on something beyond us, beyond the horizon. She wasn't moving, she wasn't breathing as far as I could tell, and yet she was definitely there. "Ma'am," Ray's whispered, gently touching her shoulder. Her head slowly, mechanically, turned towards him. Her eyes, a startlingly vibrant blue against her pallid skin, focused on Ray's, then me, then Davies. They held an unimaginable depth of pain and something else, a profound, chilling emptiness. "The cold," she rasped, her voice a dry whisper that seemed to scratch at the air. "The great cold, it lingers." She didn't shiver. Her skin was impossibly cold to the touch, like marble. We found 6 more, 5 men, 1 more woman. All dressed in the fashion of the 1930s, all emaciated, their skin translucent, their eyes holding that same ancient, vacant stare. They were huddled in what remained of a grand dining salon, amidst overturned tables and broken chandeliers, as if waiting for a meal that would never come. Their faces were etched with decades of terror, but there was no fear in their eyes now, only that profound, terrible calm. One of the men, a tall, gaunt figure in what looked like a steward's uniform, was particularly unnerving. His name, we later learned from his tattered identity card, was Thomas Albright. He had a deep gash on his forehead, long healed into a stark white scar, but his eyes were the most disturbing. They seemed to track our movements with an unsettling intelligence, a glint of something predatory hidden beneath their surface. "The rescue," Thomas rasped, his voice stronger than the woman's. "It took you long enough." The great sleep was heavy. We carefully, gingerly helped them into the inflatable. They moved slowly, stiffly, like puppets whose strings were long rusted. Their silence on the ride back to the Resolute was more unsettling than any scream. They didn't shiver in the biting wind, didn't react to the spray. They simply sat, staring ahead, their gazes fixed on a point only they could see. Back on the Resolute, the medical bay was a flurry of activity, but a hushed one. Jensen, our head medic, was a man who prided himself on his unflappable professionalism, but I saw the tremor in his hands as he tried to take their vitals. Their pulses were impossibly faint, almost non-existent. Their body temperatures were several degrees below normal, yet they showed no signs of hypothermia beyond the initial coldness of their skin. Their pupils were dilated, unresponsive to light. And their breath, it was shallow, irregular, almost like the tide, coming and going with an unnatural rhythm. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen," Jensen stammered, his voice hushed. "Their bodies should have shut down decades ago. They should be skeletons or worse. How are they alive?" Captain Davies, leaning against a bulkhead, said nothing, his face a mask of grim determination. He knew, as we all did, that this was beyond medical science, beyond logic. We gave them blankets, warm water, nutrient-paced things they took with slow, deliberate movements, their eyes never leaving us. They wouldn't answer questions about the Orion's sinking or their survival. When pressed, they would offer fragmented, anachronistic phrases. The U-boats, the Germans, the ice, the crushing pressure. But the Orion was lost in tropical waters, not from a U-boat attack and certainly not from ice. Their memories were a fractured tapestry of impossibilities. As the days turned, the initial wonder on the Resolute began to sour into a pervasive unease. The survivors, housed in a quarantined section of the medical bay, became the focal point of a subtle, creeping dread that permeated every corner of the ship. It started subtly, a pervasive chill that wasn't explained by the weather, manifesting particularly near the medical bay. Electronic equipment, usually robust, began to glitch. Navigation systems occasionally threw up phantom readings, compasses spun wildly for a few terrifying seconds, and the comms often buzzed with phantom static, sometimes carrying faint, unintelligible whispers that sounded like distant cries for help. Then came the dreams. Almost every crew member, myself included, began to experience vivid, unsettling nightmares. They were always of the sea, of crushing depths, of a ship groaning under immense pressure, of shadowy figures moving through murky water. For me, they were particularly vivid. I saw the ornate interiors of the Orion, felt the shudder of impact, heard the screams of passengers as water rushed in. I'd wake in a cold sweat, the taste of salt on my tongue, the phantom chill of the deep clinging to my skin. The survivors themselves remained largely unresponsive, but their presence was acutely felt. They rarely spoke, and when they did, it was usually Thomas Albright, the steward. He seemed to have a strange, almost magnetic effect on me. Whenever I passed the medical bay, his eyes, those unnervingly intelligent, ancient eyes, would track me. He'd offer a faint, almost imperceptible smile. One night, I was reviewing the surveillance feed from the medical bay. Most of the survivors were sleeping, or at least lying motionless with open eyes. Thomas, however, was awake. He sat upright on his cot, staring directly into the camera lens. He didn't blink. Then his lips moved. I couldn't hear anything, the feed was audio muted, but I saw his mouth form a word. My name, Thorn. A jolt of pure terror went through me. I knew with an absolute certainty that he had spoken my name. How could he? I hadn't formally introduced myself to him, only been part of the boarding and initial care. We were just faces in uniforms. I tried to rationalize it. A trick of the light, a figment of my sleep-deprived imagination. But the fear had taken root. The crew began to change. Petty Officer Miller, usually boisterous and jovial, became withdrawn, spending his off-duty hours staring blankly at the ocean. Petty Officer Chang, a meticulous engineer, started making inexplicable errors, causing minor equipment failures that baffled his superiors. Jensen, our medic, grew gaunt and pale, his once sparkling blue eyes now shadowed and haunted. He spoke of whispers in the medical bay, of the survivors moving when no one was watching, their limbs impossibly fluid. Captain Davies, sensing the growing instability, ordered stricter quarantine protocols. The survivors were confined to the medical bay, and access was limited to essential personnel only, but the damage was already done. The Resolute was no longer just a cutter, it was a cage for something ancient and malevolent. One afternoon, I was in the mess hall trying to choke down a tasteless dinner. The atmosphere was grim, hushed. Suddenly, Miller, who was seated opposite me, dropped his fork with a clang. His eyes were wide, unfocused. "Do you hear it?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "The water, it's rising." I frowned. "Miller, what are you talking about? We're perfectly stable." He ignored me, his gaze fixed on the bulkhead behind me as if peering through it. "They're calling to us, the drowned ones. They want to show us the way down." A cold dread settled in my stomach. Miller was hallucinating. This was beyond stress or sleep deprivation. It was psychological collapse. I tried to calm him, but he simply started muttering, low and rhythmic, about the sea's embrace. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The nightmares had become too real, too persistent. I decided to make my rounds, check on the ship, try to re-establish some sense of control. The Resolute felt different now, colder, heavier, as if an immense weight pressed down on its hull. The familiar sounds of the ship, the groan of metal, the hiss of hydraulics now seemed to echo with alien undertones. As I passed the brig, where they had eventually moved the survivors for tighter security, I heard a faint singing. It was a mournful, undulating sound, ancient and profoundly sad. It was in a language I didn't understand, but the melody was hauntingly beautiful, filled with despair. I peered through the reinforced viewport of the brig door. Thomas Albright was sitting cross-legged on the floor, the other survivors huddled around him, their faces illuminated by a dim emergency light. He was singing. The song flowed from his throat, a sound that resonated deep within my bones, making my teeth ache. As he sang, the other survivors slowly began to sway. Their movements were unnatural, boneless, like kelp dancing in a slow current. Then Thomas's eyes flickered to the viewport. He saw me. He stopped singing. The other survivors froze. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than the deepest ocean trench. He smiled, a wide, unsettling grin that stretched his gaunt face, revealing teeth that seemed too long, too sharp. "You listen, Marcus," he rasped, his voice cutting through the thick glass of the viewport as if it wasn't even there. "You listen to the song of the deep. It sings to us all." My blood turned to ice. He had said my name again, clearly, deliberately. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs, an icy sweat coating my skin. This was impossible. This was utterly, terrifyingly impossible. I ran to Captain Davies' quarters, burst in without knocking. He looked up from a stack of logs, his face etched with worry. "Thorn, what's wrong?" "Sir, it's them. They know things. They know my name. They're singing. It's not normal." "Something is happening to the crew. Miller's hallucinating. Jensen, he's barely functional. This isn't just a rescue, sir. It's a plague." Davies looked at me, his gaze hard, professional. Thorn, I understand you're stressed, we all are. But we have a mission, we need to get these people to shore, get them into the hands of scientists. They're an unprecedented discovery. Discovery, I practically shouted, the fear making me reckless. Sir, they're not people, not anymore. There's something else, they're bringing the Orion with them. They're bringing the deep. Davies rose, his voice stern. That's enough, petty officer. I know this is taxing, but you need to maintain your composure. I'm ordering you to get some rest. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe me, or perhaps he couldn't believe me. He was trying to hold on to the vestiges of sanity and scientific explanation, even as the walls of reality crumbled around us. I stumbled back to my bunk, unable to shake the image of Thomas's grin, the ancient song, the chilling familiarity with my name. I felt like I was drowning, even on the dry deck of the Resolute. Over the next few days, the situation aboard the Resolute deteriorated rapidly. The chilling phenomena intensified. The lights flickered constantly, sometimes plunging entire sections of the ship into darkness. The comms became useless, filled with the ghostly whispers and cries of the drowned. Navigational instruments, once reliable, now offered only erratic readings, painting our position hundreds of miles off course, then snapping back to reality, only to drift again. Crew members began to fall ill, not with any identifiable sickness, but with a profound lethargy, an unnatural chill in their bones, and the same vacant, faraway look in their eyes that the survivors possessed. Their skin became unnaturally pale, almost translucent. Their voices grew hoarse, their movements slow and deliberate. I avoided the brig, but the singing, that ancient, sorrowful melody, now seemed to emanate from the very bulkheads of the ship, a constant, low thrum beneath the throb of the engines. It was seductive, drawing you in, promising rest, promising peace in the crushing darkness. One morning I awoke to an unnatural silence. The familiar hum of the Resolute's engines was gone. The ship was adrift. I scrambled out of my bunk, heart pounding, and ran to the bridge. The bridge was deserted, the screens dark, the controls cold and lifeless. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows. Panic seized me. I rushed to the helm, tried the ignition, but nothing. The ship was dead, utterly, irrevocably dead. Through the forward windows I saw it. The mist had grown impossibly thick, a suffocating, milky white blanket that stretched in every direction. There was no sky, no horizon, just an endless, featureless void. And the air, it was impossibly cold, carrying that same cloying smell of stagnant water and old blood. A whisper, low and resonant, reached my ears. "The great sleep calls, Marcus." I spun around. Thomas Albright stood in the doorway of the bridge, his gaunt frame silhouetted against the dim corridor. He wasn't alone. Behind him, the other survivors emerged from the mist, their faces impassive, their eyes reflecting the dim light like distant stars. But they weren't dressed in their old, tattered clothes anymore. They wore the crisp, clean uniforms of the Resolute's crew. Not exactly, but almost. The cut was wrong, the fabric too old, too waterlogged, as if they had merely pulled them from the depths. And their faces, they were subtly different now, their features more defined, less skeletal, yet still holding that ancient, alien quality. What have you done?" I choked out, my voice raw with terror. Thomas smiled. It wasn't the unsettling grin from before, it was a serene, almost beatific smile, the smile of someone who had found immense peace. "We have merely awakened your vessel, Marcus. It was sleeping, dreaming of its purpose. Now it sails anew." His eyes, those impossibly old eyes, seemed to pierce through me, to see into the deepest recesses of my soul. "You rescued us, you brought us aboard, you opened the door, and now this vessel is one with the Orion. One with the deep. You brought the curse to shore, Marcus, but the shore is now here." He gestured around the bridge, and as he did, the impossible began to happen. The polished chrome of the consoles seemed to ripple and buckle, transforming into salt-crusted brass. The sleek, modern panels warped into dark, varnished wood, ornate with carvings of anchors and sea creatures. The smell of brine and decay intensified, overpowering the sterile scent of the ship. Through the windows, the mist outside seemed to writhe, and for a horrifying instant, I saw not the blank void, but the ornate, broken superstructure of the SS Orion, looming silently in the fog. The other survivors began to walk towards me, their steps slow, deliberate, each movement filled with an unnatural grace. Their eyes, once vacant, now held a strange, knowing glow. They were not emaciated anymore. Their forms were fuller, healthier, yet utterly alien, their skin having the pearlescent sheen of something that had spent an eternity in the cold, dark depths. "Join us, Marcus," Thomas murmured, his voice now a sonorous blend of human speech and the deep, resonant thrumming of the sea. "Join the crew of the Orion. We sail forever, guiding lost souls, bringing the light of the deep to the surface. Your ship, our ship, is ready." I tried to run, to scream, but my legs felt heavy, like lead. My throat was tight, choked by the pervasive cold. I felt a profound lethargy washing over me, the same strange chill that had afflicted the rest of the crew. As they approached, I saw them clearly. Miller, Chang, Jensen, even Captain Davies, their faces transformed, their uniforms the impossibly ancient, waterlogged variations of the Resolutes. Their eyes were like Thomas's, filled with the same ancient calm, the same terrible peace. They were the new crew. My own hands, when I looked down, were beginning to change. The skin was tightening, turning a sickly pale, almost translucent. My fingertips were lengthening, my nails growing thicker, like polished shell. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, a deep, pervasive chill that wasn't uncomfortable, but utterly numbing. It felt like coming home. They surrounded me, their faces serene, their hands reaching out. Not to grab, not to harm, but to welcome. I could feel their presence, cold and vast, merging with mine. The whisper in my mind grew louder, clearer, the great sleep, the journey, the endless watch. I looked into Captain Davies' eyes. They were no longer the piercing blue I remembered, but a murky green, like deep ocean water. And there in their depths I saw my own reflection, not the frightened living Marcus Thorne, but a new face. Gaunt, pale, with skin that had the texture of ancient, sea-soaked wood. My uniform was no longer the sharp blue of the Coast Guard, but a faded, water-stained gray, cut in an archaic fashion, like that of the Orion's crew. In my eyes were old, so very, very old. They held the same chilling calm, the same profound, terrible emptiness as Thomas Albright's. The cutter Resolute was no more. It was merely another extension of the Orion, another vessel, another fragment of a ship that sailed forever in an impossible sea, a new ghost ship joining the ancient procession. The humming of the engines, now restored, was not the comforting thrum of modern machinery, but the deep, resonant groaning of old timbers, the song of the abyss. I stood there at the helm of my new ship, my hands, now subtly webbed, resting on a helm that had become a relic of an age long past. The mist outside swirled, revealing glimpses of other, impossibly ancient ships sailing alongside us in the eternal fog. Their crews waved, their faces smiling, their eyes holding the same abyssal light as mine. We were waiting. Waiting for the next distress call, the next vessel, the next unsuspecting souls to guide into the deep. The journey had just begun, and the great sleep it called to all of us.